Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Women's Diaries Voice, we retell those moments honest. Every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. The Callahan house looked like a magazine cover. Ribbons matched the wreath, the garland matched the tree, and the tree matched my mother's lipstick, winterberry red unwavering. Eli killed the engine. For a breath we stayed still, palms open on our knees. You good? He asked. Good enough, I said, and stepped into the cold. Evelyn opened on the third knock, smile bright as polished silver. June. Eli. She let her gaze travel our coats, our shoes, the small hoop in his ear. Clove and sugar drifted from the hallway. Dean came warm from the den. There's my June bug. He hugged me and shook Eli's hand with both of his. Sloane was a still painting on the velvet settee, ankle over ankle. She rose, kissed the air near my cheek, and asked traffic bad without waiting for an answer. The dining room glittered. Bone blue china. Name cards in Evelyn's loops. The tree carried no schoolmate ornaments. Those had been retired years ago. We set the wine and a tin of cookies on the sideboard. Eli's hand found mine and let go. I took my old seat at Evelyn's right where she could turn and curate. You look rested, she said, a compliment measured in teaspoons. The podcast is still going. It is, I said. We're finishing a 3-part series. How nice. She placed the cranberry dish with a surgeon's calm. I saw a listing at Whitman and Webb. Real benefits. You've always had a way with words. Dean tried for a bridge. Didn't you do a strong story on that veterans center? People were generous, I said. Stories are lovely, Evelyn said, but security is lovelier. Sloane folded her napkin into a sharper square. My recital went well, she said. The director thinks I could teach beginners. That's wonderful, I said and meant it. Evelyn's eyes skimmed my sweater. Your navy dress is so flattering, June. Timeless lines. She smiled as if choosing a headline for me. We crossed the courses like people on stepping stones, carefully pretending no one could fall. Dean asked Eli about work. Eli told him he had been building shelves for the library and repainting the middle school gym. Mural work, Dean said. I'd like to see that. It's not finished, Eli said. Is there good money in murals? Evelyn asked, lightly lifting the gravy boat. Or is it more community-minded? It pays, Eli said. And it matters. Values are priceless, she said. Sloane asked, still in that old brick on Maple. For now, I said. Her eyebrow turned the phrase into a thorn. Dean cleared his throat. Let's make a plate for Miss Lydia next door, he said. She loves sweet potatoes. We can send something, Evelyn said. Presentation matters. She reached for my plate without asking, spooned exactly 1 scoop and set it back. Moderation, she murmured. Eli's foot found my ankle bone under the table. Not a jolt, just a line of contact. I watched the small scar near his thumb catch light as he poured water. Dean lifted his glass. To family. To family, we echoed. We opened gifts before the roast. Sloane's winter white scarf unfurled. Evelyn nodded at the label. I gave her a cookbook. She checked the acknowledgments before the recipes. Dean's hard cover about ballparks made him grin like a boy. We gave Sloane a green beret. She crowed charming and placed it just so. Eli offered chocolates and a bottle of red. Thank you, Evelyn said, and set them behind the centerpiece as if they might scuff the table. Back to plates. Rosemary made a small green wind. Dean carved. Conversation moved like a metronome set low. So Dean said, "What are you two looking at in the new year?" The table quieted. I took a breath that felt like stepping onto ice. I accepted a contract, I said, a documentary series, in Santa Fe. Eli's hand rested near mine. He didn't add his own plans. He didn't need to. Santa Fe. Evelyn repeated, tasting the syllables for worth. In New Mexico. Yes, I said. The desert, she said, as someone might say ditch. How long would you be gone? It's work, I said, and it's right for me. She set down her fork as if signing had ended. So you will follow him to the desert. You will leave a stable home, a respectable town, your father's health, your sister's support for audio stories. She put her napkin back on her lap, as if adjusting an exhibit. Names don't change things, June. I'm not following anyone, I said. I'm choosing my work. Her smile did not warm. She leaned a fraction enough to make privacy that wasn't private. From this table forward, there is no place for choices like that in this family. Consider yourself outside of it. The sentence did not rise. It fell. A soft thud with the weight of a door. The clock in the hall made one small sound, then went quiet. Eli breathed in, breathed out. Dean looked at the carving board as if it might advise him. Sloane kept very still, glassy-eyed and dry. I set my fork on my plate. The china did not complain. I placed my napkin beside it, smoothing the corner once. "Thank you for dinner," I said to the room, to the effort, to the years I had tried to outrun a mirror. I stood. My chair whispered against the rug. Eli rose with me. He looked at Dean. "Sir," he said. Not apology, not challenge. A hello that had run out of days. No one said wait. In the foyer, I pulled on my coat. My scarf made a small wave that refused training. Eli helped with the sleeves, the practiced gesture of someone who knows how fabric can snag when you hurry. We left our tin of cookies on the table by the door. Evelyn stayed seated in the dining room, a figure in a painting of her own arranging. Dean's chair creaked once and settled. Sloane's green beret lay on the white tablecloth like a dot on a map. Outside, the night was a steady blue. Snow sifted onto the hedges without asking. The car chirped when Eli unlocked it. Behind us, every window blazed. I put my hand on the passenger door and felt the cold come through the metal. "June," Eli said. "I know," I said. Somewhere behind us, the front door latch clicked shut, a small sound that carried. We drove through streets that glittered with ice and cartoon reindeer, the kind of decorations that try too hard to look cheerful. The heater coughed. Eli kept one hand at 12 o'clock, the other resting open on his thigh. I watched his palm, the way a person watches the shore from a boat somewhere steady to line myself against. At the apartment, the hallway smelled like someone else's cinnamon. Inside, we didn't turn on the overheads. Lamps made small rooms of light, the sofa, the counter, the plant we always forgot to water. I stood in my coat keys, biting my palm. "Want tea?" he asked. "Boil the ocean," I said, and smiled because I could still manage a joke which felt like a proof of life. He kissed my hairline, then moved with the unremarkable competence I knew from the kettle to the mugs to the pantry, a man assembling simple mercies. My phone lay black-faced on the table. It ticked to life, a light I didn't touch. If I looked, I would have to read. If I read, I would have to answer. Eli brought the tea and sat so our knees touched. "You don't have to narrate anything," he said. "We were there." I nodded. My coat slid from my shoulders. The apartment hummed with ordinary sounds, pipes in the wall, a radiator clanking awake our upstairs neighbor's laugh. I pictured the table we'd left the napkin, the beret, the smooth rotation of Evelyn's fork, and then let the picture fall apart like a snow globe. Someone stopped shaking. Sleep came in pieces. At 3, I woke with my jaw locked, as if it had been asked to hold something heavy in secret. The streetlight printed a window frame on the ceiling. I lay still and counted my pulse. In the morning, silence arrived with its list of tasks. I opened the family plan and removed my number. The website asked if I was sure 3 times. I changed the garage code at our place, even though my mother did not have it. The gesture mattered to some ancient part of me that kept a tally of doors. I called the insurance office and listened to an earnest trumpet playing on hold while I gave my social security number to a cheerful stranger. When the agent asked if this was due to a life event, I said, "Apparently." Around noon, Sloane left a voicemail. I didn't see it until later because Eli had hidden my phone in the bread box, a place no one would suspect, and where he knew I would forget to look. When I did press play, her voice was a braid of satin and wire. Dean was worried sick, she said, using his name instead of Dad, a thing she did when she wanted to be fair and distant at once. "Mom hasn't eaten since lunch." "You made a scene, June. That was uncalled for. You should call and apologize before this cements into something ugly. We can smooth this if you don't double down." I let the message finish. The phone offered to play it again, a polite threat. I saved it and labeled it Sloane 1225, then slid it into a folder named because I needed a name family. I stared at the word until it began to look like a brand on a carton of milk. Work returned like weather. My inbox waited with questions about audio cuts and a guest who had changed her mind. I answered the easy things and deferred the hard ones. My editor Maris poked her head over my desk partition the way a friend peeks around a doorframe. "You've got that look," she said. "Do you need deadline triage?" "I'm okay," I said. "You're a terrible liar," she said without judgment. 5 minutes on the back stairs. We stood on the metal steps behind the building, huffing steam. The alley carried the smell of coffee grounds from the cafe next door. I told her the bare minimum left early complicated, probably messy. She touched the rail with 2 fingers and said, "Okay. Take whatever you need inside our actual deadlines, and if you want to turn any of it into tape, say the word." Then she clanged back up, giving me the gift of not looking over her shoulder for a moral. That night I dreamt about hair. My mother's hands held scissors that didn't glint. She snipped, snipped, snipped at nothing I could see, and pieces of me fell to the floor like black paper. On the second day, I opened my notes app and typed, "sound." I can hear right now the radiator, the neighbor's radio, the kettle beginning to argue. Then I recorded 1 minute of the argument. It wasn't a plan, it was proof the air made room. Eli had been in the woodshop most of the afternoon. He came home smelling like cedar and glue. "I made a mistake on a shelf," he said. "I measured twice and cut wrong anyway." "You're human," I said. He nodded as if the idea still surprised him and went to shower. When he came back, he held out his hands, palms up, tiny splinters sparkling under the skin. "Do you want the tweezers or should I?" "I'll do it," I said, and we sat under the lamp while I went hunting. The work demanded attention and rewarded it. I couldn't think about anything else while I teased a clear sliver from his thumb, lifted it free, and placed it like a rare hair on the arm of the chair. He exhaled as if making room for new air. On the 3rd morning, the apartment was too quiet. I put on boots and walked to the grocery store to buy nothing in particular. At the door, a woman asked if I could sign for a fundraiser. I signed because she had the same kind eyes as the nurse who'd taken out my stitches when I was 6. Under the fluorescent lights, oranges shone like they had been polished. I put 3 in my basket and then 4 more. Eli likes oranges, I thought, and the thought felt like a railing. When I came home, there was a small envelope under our door, tucked through the crack with care. The handwriting wasn't Evelyn's or Sloane's. Inside was a recipe from our neighbor Ms. Duffy for better hot chocolate, handwritten in blue pen with a list of exacting instructions about milk and patience. At the bottom, she had written, "I heard late footsteps and hoped you were safe. I knocked, but didn't want to intrude. If you need sugar, holler. D." I put the card on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a cat wearing glasses. Eli made the hot chocolate precisely once, and then a day later precisely again, because he liked the part where the milk almost boils and you have to rescue it. He said, "Look at that each time, as if he'd spotted a whale off a ferry." On the 4th day, I called a therapist. The first 2 offices were closed until January. The 3rd picked up on the 2nd ring. The receptionist spoke with a plain kindness I trusted immediately. "The earliest is next Tuesday at 3 with Dr. Hartman," she said. "How does that sound?" "It sounds like a chair," I said. "I can sit in it." The office was in a brick building that had once been a school. On the way there, Eli drove with his right hand on my knee, not possessive, not bracing, just there. The waiting room held 2 armchairs that were better than they looked, and a ficus that had decided to live. I filled out the intake form with a pen that wrote thin blue lines. When the door opened, a woman in her 50s stepped out. She wore boots sensible enough to go anywhere, and a sweater that made me think of all the colors you get when you stir paint left over in a bucket. "June," she said. "I'm Dr. Hartman." Her office had a window pressed up close to a tree. In the glass, the branches made a net. She sat. I sat. She waited the way a person leaves a chair pulled out for you at a dinner you weren't sure you should attend. I started with minutiae, the napkin, the beret, the fork, and then said my mother's sentence out loud in a room that could bear it. When I finished, Dr. Hartman didn't tilt her head like a metronome or fold her hands into a church. She asked, "When people have wanted things from you, how have they usually asked?" The question was not a trap, it was a map. I told her about disguise help, disguised as love control, disguised as care, rules disguised as standards. She listened until the words turned into unimportant objects on a shelf, and then said, "There are names for patterns like that." She didn't say them yet. She offered me a set of sentences to carry out the door. "When someone asks you to perform, you can say I'm not available for that." When someone insists on a fight, you can say, "I won't be discussing this." When someone offers you a seat at a table that hurts, you can stand. On the 5th day, I made a folder on my laptop called Famcom's No Reply. I pulled Sloane's voicemail into it. I backed it up in the cloud because old instincts are hard to kill. Then I opened my voice recorder and said, "This is not for broadcast," because saying so made it true. I described the radiator again. I described the way the tea kettle sighs when you lift it off the heat, like a body making a small decision. I described the gap in my back molars where a childhood filling had fallen out, and how my tongue kept finding it as if to reassure itself that change leaves evidence. That night, Eli set a level along the top of a picture frame that always hung crooked and adjusted the nail one decisive tap. The bubble moved into the clear. He looked at me with the quiet pride of a man who has coaxed a thing to behave without breaking it. "There," he said. "Good," I said, and felt everything inside me slide a half-inch toward square. Outside, the snow had hardened into a thin crust that made little sounds when a car rolled over it. I turned off the lamp and let the dark be itself. The apartment held. The heat clicked and settled. I breathed in, breathed out, and named what I could hear. The mail slot clattered against the door like a small cymbal. I was at the sink rinsing a mug. The sound carried clean and bright. On the mat lay a cream envelope with my name written in the particular tilt my mother taught me at the dining room table loops controlled no flourish wasted. The paper held a faint perfume that made me think of winter coats taken from plastic and of women who never hurry. Eli was at the shop. I dried my hands and sat at the counter where the light is kind in the morning. The plant is just out of reach, and the radio sometimes cannot decide if it is tuned. I looked at the envelope longer than it took to open it, then opened it anyway, slow, like a person unwrapping a glass kept on the top shelf for guests. 4 pages, blue ink, lines that wove in and out of apology without ever putting a pin in one. She wrote about holidays being about continuity, about names you don't choose, but carry about how love sometimes requires correction, a phrase that dressed as care. She wrote about the town and its memory, and how neighbors take note. She wrote about a jade pendant that has followed our women from a Shanghai trunk to Chicago to Hawthorne, and how it should rest on the throat of the daughter who keeps faith with the family's standard. She did not write my name near it. She did not write "I'm sorry." Between paragraphs, she stacked the small receipts of motherhood ballet lessons, a particular dress, a dentist bill I hadn't asked her to pay. Near the end, she wrote in a different hand tighter, "I do not recognize the person you are with. I do not recognize the person you are with him." Then she returned to Winterberry's script, "Come home and act accordingly. We can salvage this." I read it once then again, like an editor who knows what won't make the final cut. My jaw ached in its old way. The muscles have memories of their own. I put the pages back in the envelope and held it so the light picked up indents where her pen pressed harder. The pendant sat there on the page as if it could tip a scale. The voice recorder on my phone waited without asking for anything. I tapped it and said the date. I read the first 2 lines of the letter into the microphone, then stopped. The sound of my own voice describing hers took the drama out of it like holding a bright coin at arm's length. I saved the file and slid the envelope into a manila folder I had already labeled with a Sharpie Famcom's No Reply. The dash steadied me. An hour later, my phone blinked with a text from Dean, a photograph of the backyard I grew up in, the old maple, wearing snow, the wooden swing my father refused to throw out even when the rope furred. Shoveled the walk for Mrs. Green. "Your snowman would have melted by noon anyway," he wrote. Then after a beat, "Miss you, kiddo. All of you." I typed, "Thanks for the picture. Stay warm." I stared at the bubble while it hovered to become more, then let it go. The message flew off without weight and did not return with a sound. Work moved around me. I cut 2 minutes of dead air from an interview with a teacher who could not stop apologizing for crying as if grief needed a permit. Mara slid a sticky note onto my desk that read, "Breathe," as if it were a task. I stuck it to my water bottle and found myself drinking more. The second therapy appointment fell on a gray afternoon that promised rain and decided on mist. Dr. Hartman's office smelled faintly of books and orange peels. She asked if she could hear the opening of the letter. I read without commentary. When I finished, she pointed at a low shelf along the wall. "See that?" she said. The shelf ran the length of the room, a simple line of wood like a horizon. Safe storage, she said. Sometimes we put things there not gone, not in our hands, just there. I made a folder, I said. That's a shelf too, she said. You can build more of them. She did not name my mother's patterns like offenses in a code. She asked how my body told me I was small, how it told me I was 30 inches high again, in a stiff dress, hands on my knees. We practiced sentences that did not invite argument because they did not contain doors. I won't be discussing this. She had me say it until the words fit my mouth. We practiced leaving 7 steps to a door, hand on the knob, turn. Your legs know how to go, she said. Let them. When I left the hall, smelled like copy paper and dust, the building's old life flickering. On the street, the sky had chosen a color between silver and pearl. I walked to the bus because the space between places can be a room too. At home, the envelope sat where I had left it. I did not move it. The apartment made its small noises, the radiator, the upstairs neighbor flushing the tiny click our refrigerator makes when it decides to rest. I lay on the carpet and watched the ceiling sway the way ceilings do when you respect them too much. Everything held. Eli called from the shop. You want to come by? I could use your eye. The wood shop breathes different air, sawdust sweet and dry, a suggestion of heat that doesn't come from radiators. Eli had a board laid out on 2 sawhorses. Pencil marks sliced across it in quick diagonals. A tape measure hung from his back pocket by habit. He tossed me a stick of chalk. Can you snap me a straight line from here to here? He showed me how to anchor the string, how to pull it up lightly and let it slap the wood true. The blue left a clean stripe like certainty. There, he said. That's our cut? He pointed to a space painted on the floor, a bright yellow band where feet aren't meant to go when the saw is eating. Stand outside that, he said. The saw likes to throw things. I stood outside it the way he asked. The motor whined, the blades sang, the board surrendered. In the pause after I could hear sawdust settling. He rubbed the edge with his thumb and nodded. Good, he said. I didn't have to ask if he meant the line or the wood or the way I had stayed where I was supposed to. On my way out, I pocketed the chalk. Sloane called that evening and didn't leave a message. The phone showed her missed call like a red flag in a quiet field. I put it face down and went to the sink where Ms. Duffy's hot chocolate recipe leaned against the backsplash as if supervising. I followed the instructions with attention, watched the milk as if it were trying to get away. Add cocoa in a rain. Whisk until it softens its mind. When it was done, I poured 2 mugs. Eli took his to the window and blew across the surface. You kept the line straight, he said, glancing at the chalk dust on my fingers. Mostly, I said. I built a second shelf that night, not of wood, but of cardboard, a shoebox with an index card taped to the lid. Fam comms, no reply. Hard copy. I wrote the parentheses a kind of smile for myself. I slid the envelope in. The box made a new home in the closet above the extra towels and below the sweaters no one wears in March. In bed, I opened my hand and found the chalk had left a faint blue crescent along the side of my palm, as if I'd been quietly marked for something that does not require permission. I rubbed it and it smudged but did not disappear. The apartment settled into the hour when pipes remember rivers and cars take their time at lights. The room pressed itself around us, not tight, not loose of fit you learn by living in it. I listened for the smallest sounds I could name and let the rest be unnamed. By the time the chalk washed from my palm, the lease was signed and the boxes were labeled in my handwriting that still remembered my mother's loops. We drove west under a sky that kept changing its mind about blue. States slid by like pages. You don't dog-ear a water tower with a cartoon canary, a diner whose sign flickered. Open in daylight, anyway. A motel shaped like a row of teepees, somebody's idea of charming. Past Amarillo, the land lifted and widened. The air turned spare as if someone had cleared a room for a piano. Santa Fe announced itself with brown walls the color of bread and smoke that smelled like piñon. Eli rolled down both windows and let the wind come in sideways. You smell that, he said. The air tasted clean and old at once, like a hymn with no words. Our place was a small adobe with a crooked gate and a yard of crushed stone that made a noise when you crossed it, so you knew you were coming home. The landlord, a retired music teacher named Yolanda, left a jar of dried chilies on the kitchen counter and a note in capitals. "Welcome. The radiant heat is old but fierce. Do not argue with it." She had drawn a smiley face that wore lipstick. We set the mattress on the floor and slept like people who have stopped bracing. In the morning light came thin and exact through the salt-streaked windows. I stood barefoot and put my palm on the wall. The plaster felt cool like the back of a wrist. The heat radiated in soft pulses through the pipes, patient as a metronome. The office for the documentary series occupied the second floor of a brick building with a gallery below and a cafe to the left. On the stairs, someone had painted a line of turquoise that climbed with you as if to insist on cheer. Maris had written me a welcome email with bullet points that were not sharp. In person, she handed me a lanyard, a battered field recorder, and a mug that said take the lid off when you were ready for the heat. "We're doing stories that live inside the body," she said. Food water work, things you can touch. The first day, I sat in on an edit where the room's attention tightened around a woman's voice describing the first rain after a dry season. "Leave the pause," someone said. "Let the ground breathe." I wrote, "Leave the pause" in the margin of my notebook and underlined it once careful as a seam. Eli found the community center almost by accident, wandering with a pocket notebook the way other men carry a compass. The center's cinder block walls wanted color. That was what the director said when Eli offered to help these walls want a story. They handed him a week of afternoons and a bucket of paint the red of a door you would never kick. After work, I went there with a little mic and no plan. The gym smelled like wax and sneakers. Kids moved in the space the way certain birds move in a wind tunnel, testing edges doubling back. Eli had sketched a river across one wall. It ran in a wide curve that knew what it was doing. The kids argued over shades of blue, as if the water might get its feelings hurt. "Can I talk to you while you paint?" I asked a girl with a high ponytail and a shirt that said "Nope" in a cheerful font. "If you don't ask dumb questions," she said, which felt like a contract. I clipped the mic to her collar and asked nothing fancy. "Where are we? What color is this? Who told you that you were good at something?" She said her granddad, then added, "He says persistence is just stubborn, spelled pretty." The word made the room brighter. I heard the brush on the wall like rain that had changed its mind about being quiet. Our landlord's neighbor, a potter with forearms as strong as her bowls, brought over apricots in a brown paper bag and a jar of jam with a label that read, "Luck." "You look like the kind of people who will stay," she said, and then laughed like she had told a joke no one needed to unpack. On Saturdays, we walked the rail yard market where people sold bread that cracked just right, and the air carried sage like a reminder. A man at a stall said, "These carrots remember dirt," and handed me one that still wore a little. I recorded small things, the sound of a broom against the gallery floor, the bell over the cafe door hitting its note, a child practicing a D scale in a room with bad acoustics. At work, I cut with a light hand. "You keep the bones," Maris said, passing behind me. "You don't make a new animal." At night, I lay on the sofa and let the radiant heat persuade the cold out of my knees. One afternoon, Dr. Hartman called to offer a televisit. The screen held her in a square, the background different, but the boots the same. I told her the room smelled like dust and cinnamon. I told her I had begun to say sentences and not explain them. She asked how my body told me yes, how it told me no. I said yes felt like a line of light across the floor of the woodshop, clean and certain. No felt like the old kitchen where the overhead was too bright and you couldn't see the edges of shadows. She said, "Keep watching for those." Eli's mural grew honest. He took the kids' shapes and made space for them inside the river, a pickup truck with sweet peas in the bed, a grandmother's cardigan blowing like a flag, a ladder leaning where no one needed to climb a fish the size of a funny secret. One boy, 10 and fierce, painted a sun that wore sunglasses and then painted the sunglasses the color of the gym floor. "It sees us," he said. On a Thursday evening, the community center held an open night to thank the people who had carried ladders and sandwiches. The director strung white lights that pretended not to be new. Parents leaned against the bleachers with the tired pride of people who have worked all day and still came. I stood next to Eli and felt chalk under my fingernails even though I hadn't touched the line. Toward the end, Eli led me outside to the side yard, where the air slipped colder. The sky did that New Mexico thing where it goes purple like a bruise and then gets over it. He put both hands in his jacket pockets as if checking whether he had remembered them. I made something he said. With help. He opened a small box that wasn't new. Inside lay a thin silver band, imperfect in a way that warmed me. On the inside, stamped small and clean, was a word I knew from his mouth when he put a level on a picture and waited for the bubble stay. I know you don't need saving, he said, in the voice you use when a room is big and you want words to behave. I don't either. I want to take off my coat in the same place as you. My body answered before my mouth did. My shoulders let go as if a song had found the right key. Yes, I said, and the word hit the air like something central. He slid the ring on. It sat as if it had been there for hours already, as if my hand had been practicing its shape. A cheer rose from the gym at something happening we couldn't see. A child ran outside, saw us, and ran back in like a messenger who didn't want to ruin the surprise. We went inside where the mural waited with all its river. The kids lined up to step back and say, "Look." Eli cleaned a smear of cobalt from a girl's wrist with the corner of his sleeve. She held up her hand like a trophy. In the parking lot later, someone's radio played a song with a steel guitar that made the night wider. Back at the Adobe, the heater clicked alive with the stubborn competence of a thing that knows its job. On the kitchen counter, Yolanda's chilies glowed like punctuation. I took the shoebox labeled Famcom's No Reply hard copy down from the closet shelf and slid it further back behind the sweaters, not to hide it, but to give the other things room. Eli set the level on the mantel out of habit. The bubble drifted and then centered itself without his help. I went into the yard and stood on the crushed stone. The sound it made under my shoes was small and decisive. The sky had kept one star out where I could see it without trying. Inside the ring warmed to me. The walls held their cool. The night smelled like smoke and something green. I breathed in and the air moved as if I were part of it. The night before we said the words, I turned on the recorder and set it on the kitchen counter beside Yolanda's jar of chilies. The house made its small repertoire, the radiant heat ticking like a polite metronome, the wind finding the chime over the gate traffic far away, pretending to be the ocean. I said the date. I described the ring as if it were a tool, a thin silver band with a word pressed on the inside like a thumbprint. I listed the colors the sky carried when it lost interest in blue. I said nothing about why we were here. I stopped the recording and didn't play it back. In the morning, Eli took the sawhorses into the yard and arranged the chairs he'd built. 12, then 14, then 2 more because he remembered Miss Duffy's sister and the potter's quiet partner. The chairs were cousins, not twins, slats, a little uneven knots showing where the wood had been stubborn. He set them in a gentle U that made a room where there wasn't one. The crushed stone underfoot answered each step with a dry hush. Maris came by on her way to the station and left a stack of white napkins tied with twine. "They don't match," she said, pleased, and kissed my temple like it was a greeting we'd practiced. The potter arrived later with bowls that were heavier than they looked and a pie she'd labeled pecan. Maybe because the nuts were some other kind she liked better. The kids from the community center walked over in a knot, carrying paper banners they'd painted a river, a ladder to nowhere, a fish in sunglasses that now wore a tiny boutonniere because the smallest boy insisted. Yolanda set a steel pot on the stove and told the heat what it already knew. I wrote names on small cards with the thin blue pen that always made me slow down. On the first card, I wrote my own name and slid it at the head of the table. That wasn't a head, just a corner where the tablecloth fell longer. The second card I wrote for Eli. I tucked "Stay" under his plate for a joke we wouldn't have to explain. I wrote cards for people who had shown up before they were invited, the neighbor who lent us a ladder, the cashier who let me run back for the wallet. I forgot the gallery owner who'd carried boxes up the turquoise stairs without looking at his watch. For my father, I addressed an envelope to the hardware store where he picked up special orders. Inside a simple card with the address and time, no RSVP. I had mailed it weeks ago on a morning that smelled like rain without proof. I didn't check the gate every 5 minutes. I put his name on a card and slid it near the end of the table, the good end with the view of the cottonwood. If he came, the chair would be there. If he didn't, the chair would still be there. By late afternoon, the backyard had the look of a room a house makes for you when it decides you can be trusted. The string lights were ordinary and generous. Ms. Duffy knocked once and came in twice carrying a plate of brown sugar cookies that remembered some old church. "You'll want this," she said, setting a salt shaker on the table like a blessing. The wind carried piñon again and something green from the arroyo. I dressed in the bedroom where the light is thinner, the wall cool through cotton. The dress was gray, the kind of gray that doesn't argue with the sky. It had a small pocket in the seam, and I slipped the chalk in without thinking the stub from Eli's shop blue is a line you can trust. When I stepped outside, the air emptied its pockets of heat for the day and handed us the rest. We didn't hire an officiant. The Potter had the necessary certificate and a voice that didn't need a microphone. She stood with us under the curve of the chairs and said our names the way a person says a street she's walked 100 times. Eli took my hands with the same care he uses taking a frame off a nail. The kids in the back row tried and failed to be quiet in the way that mattered, which was to say they were perfect. "I don't have vows," I said, and it wasn't nerves. "I have a sentence. I said it so everyone could hear. I will live in the same weather as you." It sounded right in my mouth like a tool that fits your hand. Eli's sentence was shorter. "Stay," he said, and didn't blink like a man afraid the word might escape. The Potter asked if anyone objected in the old fashion. The wind rustled the banners. The chime argued once with the gate, and the silence we kept felt earned. We said yes, where yes belonged. The Potter declared what the state requires and what the room had already decided. Eli kissed me like a promise with its shoes already off. We ate at the long table that pretended not to be borrowed from 3 different neighbors. Yolanda ladled stew that made everyone fall briefly quiet. Maris told a story about a station fire alarm that rang exactly once on the hour for a month, and no one could make it stop. The kids stole more bread than would look polite in a photograph, and were told to do it again. The bowls the Potter made disappeared and came back with new colors inside them. Someone put a record player on the stoop, and the first song didn't fit and the second did. Eli danced the kind of dance that says, "I know my feet get in my way, and I have brought them anyway." I lifted my dress to keep from stepping on the hem and found my pocket with the chalk. I rubbed the blue across my thumb and pressed it under the table edge, a small arc only we would see when we wiped the table later. Halfway through pie, the gate opened with a click that had the manners to be shy. Dean stood there in his good jacket and the hat he wore when he wanted to look like he took the weather seriously. He held a rectangular parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with the kind of string you cut with your teeth. He didn't scan the room for permission. He took off his hat and held it the way men of his age hold hats when they decide to stay. I rose. The chair made that sound chairs make when they remember they were trees. "Hi, Dad," I said. "Junebug," he said, and the nickname did not embarrass either of us. He glanced at Eli and then at our hands, as if checking we had the right number of fingers between us. "I saw the lights from the road," he said. "Congratulations." He put the parcel on the table, careful not to knock anyone's glass. Inside the paper was the wooden seat of the old swing, sanded the row poles clean, the paint gone. He had carved our names on the underside small and without flourish. It smelled like the backyard of my childhood when it behaved. "I brought you something that holds," he said. "Stay for stew," Yolanda told him, as if she had been waiting for a cue. He took the chair with his name on it and didn't mention the card. He ate like a man who had driven too far and found the thing worth the drive. He listened more than he spoke. When he laughed, he put his hand on the table like it might lift. He didn't talk about the house in Hawthorne, or the winter, or what a town looks like when it keeps score. He asked Ms. Duffy for the cookie recipe and promised in that way he had to never bake it. When the plates cleared, the kids stood and clapped for themselves and for us, and for the river and the gym that now knew our names. The Potter stacked bowls with the authority of a person who understands gravity. Maris pretended to leave twice and then stayed. Someone fastened the fish banner to the fence where it winked at the star that had shown up early. Eli set the swing seat on the mantel for now, where the level's bubble slid left and then slowly slid back. As people drifted toward the gate, they touched my elbow or my shoulder in passing. Like you do in a crowded kitchen, permission, not claim. Dean waited until the last had gone. He put on his hat because night had its own rules. "I'll be around in this morning," he said. "There's a squeak in your gate wants seeing to." "Okay," I said. He squeezed Eli's arm, an old handshake they invented just then. "You built good chairs," he said. "They're honest," Eli said. Honest Holstein said, and left by the side yard where the stone is noisier. The house went quiet the way a good crowd does when the encore's over and everyone knows it. We picked up plates without talking much. Eli carried chairs inside 2 at a time and leaned them against the wall where the plaster takes care of things. I found the chalk thumbprint under the table edge and pressed it again to make it permanent in the way chalk never is. When we were done, we stood in the yard and looked at the table as if it might look back. Inside, the ring warmed because that's what metal does near a body. I put the recorder on the mantel next to the swing seat and the level and did not turn it on. Eli rinsed bowls, and I dried them the rhythm of one person handing and one person receiving with no ceremony. The heater clicked. The chime touched its note once and thought better of it. The night air came through the kitchen screen and brought whatever it could carry without spilling. Before bed, I climbed the step stool and nudged the shoebox labeled Famcoms No Reply. Hard copy, further back, past the sweaters that would not be needed for a while. Not to hide it. To shelve it among the ordinary extra towels, winter hats, the tape measure that forever relocates itself. On my way down, I brushed the lintel with my fingers like a superstition I like to keep. We turned off the lamps. The room kept its shape in the dark. The level's bubble settled where it was supposed to. Eli lay on his back and breathed like someone who trusts a ceiling. I lay on my side and felt the ring's small circle and the cool of the wall through the sheet, and the day snug itself into the house. Outside, the crushed stone remembered our feet. The air, unworried, moved through the night and into morning without asking for permission. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.